Have you ever stopped to wonder why a piece of paper can make your heart race, or why a tiny number on a screen can decide how free you feel? We call it money, but what we're really trading is something far more fragile. A small coin passes from one hand to another. For a second, both people pause, not because of the metal itself, but because of what it represents: trust, effort, promise, a silent agreement that this tiny object has meaning. We rarely stop to question it, we just believe. From childhood, we're taught what money is long before we understand what it does. A parent hands a child a few coins for a treat, and the child feels something powerful: ownership, possibility, pride. Yet those coins are only bits of metal. Their worth lives entirely in our minds. That's the quiet trick of money. It doesn't need to be real to shape our lives. It only needs to be believed in. Every bill, every card, every number glowing on a phone screen, they all depend on invisible faith. And somehow that faith moves mountains. It builds cities, funds wars, raises families, and keeps entire worlds turning. We wake up every day inside a story we never chose to write, repeating rituals of exchange that give shape to our sense of safety, success, and belonging. But beneath all of it lies something fragile: the truth that value isn't found in gold, paper, or code. It's found in the space between us, in the trust we lend to one another. The dollar, the yen, the euro, each is a mirror reflecting our collective imagination. If we stopped believing tomorrow, the illusion would vanish. The paper would still be paper. The numbers would still exist, but empty. The systems we built would lose their gravity. And yet, despite knowing this, we keep believing, because belief is what keeps us connected. This story is about that connection, about how we learn to attach meaning to matter, and why we still cling to symbols that promise security. It's about how value was never just about wealth, but about what we need to feel safe, seen, and understood. By the time we reach the end of this journey, you'll see money not as a thing to chase, but as a mirror reflecting the deepest parts of who we are: our fears, our hopes, and the invisible threads that tie us together. If that kind of understanding speaks to you, subscribe and stay with me, because what we're about to uncover isn't just a story about money, it's a story about us. And it begins here, where belief turns metal into meaning and imagination becomes value. Chapter 1: The First Believers. Before there was money, there was trust. Imagine a small village thousands of years ago. A fisherman returns from the sea with more catch than his family can eat. A farmer nearby has baskets of grain. They meet by chance near the water and begin to talk. No words about value are spoken. Only need, gratitude, fairness. The fisherman offers 2 fish. The farmer offers 1 basket. Both nod. Both walk away feeling something that doesn't yet have a name: the quiet satisfaction of a fair trade. Long before coins, before notes, before the first marketplace was built, value was not a number. It was a feeling, a sense of balance, something inside us that whispered when an exchange felt right or wrong. The earliest humans lived by that feeling. It was how trust was born. To trade with someone was to see them, to believe they would honor a promise. And from that belief came something extraordinary: cooperation, the ability to work together without force, to imagine that tomorrow could be better if we shared what we had today. Anthropologists once thought money began with barter. but barter itself was rare. People didn't wander around swapping goats for grain with strangers. They traded within relationships, among neighbors, friends, families. What really flowed between them wasn't goods but confidence. The confidence that the other person would remember, would return, would not take advantage. That emotional current, invisible and ancient, is the first form of value. Even now, when a stranger holds open a door, or when we lend something and trust it will be returned, we're practicing the same ritual that once made societies possible. The act of believing before proof, the act of seeing value in another person's word. At the center of it all is the human mind's deep hunger for fairness. Children sense it long before they can count. When one gets more candy than the other, protest erupts. That's not fair. In those simple words lies the foundation of every economy, every contract, every moral code we've built. Fairness is not just a social rule, it's emotional glue. It tells us when to give, when to keep, when to trust, and when to walk away. And long before we invented money to measure fairness, we measured it with feeling. But feelings are fragile. What happens when one side takes more than the other? When a promise is broken? In early communities, betrayal cut deep. A bad exchange wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous. It fractured trust, shook the delicate balance that held people together. To repair it, we needed symbols, ways to remember who owed what, who gave, who received. That's how value began to take shape in the world, not from wealth, but from memory. At first, the symbols were simple: a carved token, a piece of pottery, a tally on a stick. Each mark stood for a promise, not gold, not silver, just trust made visible, a way to carry fairness through time. Imagine a small clay tablet sitting by a village fire, etched with marks that say, "I gave you 3 sacks of grain. You will return me 2 baskets of fish when the tide is right." It isn't money yet. It's something deeper, a record of faith. This early form of accounting wasn't cold or mathematical. It was emotional technology. It allowed people to extend trust beyond the moment, to make cooperation last. And soon, these small symbols began to change us. Once we could track value, we began to imagine it, to assign worth not only to objects, but to effort, skill, beauty. The hunter's strength, the weaver's hands, the storyteller's words, all became part of an invisible economy of meaning. We began to compare, to wonder, to dream of more. That dreaming, that urge to measure and to seek, planted the first seed of what money would later become, the shared illusion that worth can be captured, counted, and passed along. But even in those early days, the illusion wasn't deception. It was connection. When people exchanged gifts or food or time, they weren't tricking each other into belief. They were building something together, a shared sense of what mattered. There are still cultures today where gifts flow instead of money. In some islands of the Pacific, large stone discs once stood as currency. Too heavy to move, they stayed where they were, while ownership changed through stories and acknowledgement. When someone gave or received one, everyone knew. The stone itself did nothing. The value lived entirely in memory, in the collective story that kept the island's trust alive. This is the oldest truth about money, and maybe the most easily forgotten, that it began as a conversation. Every exchange said something about who we were to one another. The object didn't matter. What mattered was the belief beneath it. A fisherman and a farmer by the sea, a tally stick beside the fire, a promise remembered by the village, each one a small act of faith. We like to imagine money as a thing, coins, notes, screens, but at its heart it's an emotion we learn to organize. The need to trust, the fear of being cheated, the relief of fairness, the pride of keeping a promise. That's why even in our digital age, the smallest acts of exchange still carry deep feeling. When a friend pays for lunch, when we give a gift, when someone refuses to accept help, we feel the same invisible weight our ancestors once did, the need to balance, to be fair, to matter. The first believers in value didn't believe in gold or silver. They believed in one another, and in that belief, they built the first foundations of society. Every civilization that followed, every market, every bank, every stock exchange, would rest on that same fragile truth, that trust, once given, creates something real. And though we now live in a world of digital balances and shifting economies, the oldest form of value still exists in the simplest places. A handshake, a promise, a parent saving for a child's future. These moments remind us that the illusion of value was never about greed or gain. It was about hope, the hope that what we give will be honored, and that what we receive carries meaning. We may have built towers of finance and oceans of data, but underneath them all still beats the same human rhythm. The quiet exchange between two people, believing in each other just enough to trade. That is where the illusion began, and that is where, even now, it remains most true. Chapter 2: The Psychology of Precious Things. Before money, there was wonder. Long before we began to count or measure, we were drawn to certain things without knowing why. A smooth stone, a bright feather, a piece of amber caught in sunlight. We carried them home not for use, but for how they made us feel. They were useless yet sacred, and in that quiet attraction, in the pull of beauty, rarity, and meaning, we planted the first seeds of what would one day become value. Every child still feels it, the small treasure hidden in a pocket, the shiny coin kept for no reason at all. The world is full of things that mean nothing until someone loves them. That's the strange power of the human mind, to turn objects into symbols, to fill the lifeless with emotion. The earliest humans didn't need language to sense this pull. Across continents, ancient burial sites tell the same story. Beads carved from bone, shells placed beside the dead, stones arranged in patterns. These weren't tools or food, they were feelings made visible. Love, memory, reverence. Things chosen not for survival, but for significance. That choice marked the beginning of something new, the idea that worth could exist beyond function, that beauty itself could hold meaning. Psychologists call this the endowment effect, the way we assign extra value to what we own simply because it's ours. But ownership alone doesn't explain why certain things call to us more deeply than others. Some objects seem to glow with importance, as if they whisper back the stories we project onto them. A wedding ring, a family photo, an old key. Their power isn't in the material, but in the memories they carry. In the ancient world, beauty and rarity became intertwined. The harder something was to find, the more we cherished it. A bright stone discovered in a riverbed felt like a secret between nature and the finder. Gold, in particular, seemed to hold light. It didn't rust, didn't fade, and seemed to glow even in the dark. When people first held it, they didn't see money, they saw magic. Gold's appeal wasn't logical, it was emotional. It felt alive, eternal, divine. To touch it was to feel permanence in a world that constantly changed. And that feeling, the comfort of holding something that endures, became its first true worth. But before gold, there were countless smaller obsessions. The first shells traded across Africa were worn as jewelry, tokens of beauty and belonging. They passed from person to person, carrying meaning far beyond their use. In a world where survival demanded practicality, these small, useless treasures told another story, that humans were no longer driven by need alone. We were driven by feeling. That shift changed everything. Once we began to desire what we didn't need, the illusion of value began to grow. We learned to assign worth not just to what fed us, but to what moved us. A beautiful object could buy attention, affection, respect. It became a language of emotion, one that everyone could understand, but no one could fully explain. This language still shapes us. A gift feels special not because of its price, but because of the meaning we imagine it holds. A ring becomes love. A medal becomes honor. A brand becomes identity. Objects speak to our longing to be seen, remembered, admired. Every society has its version of these treasures. For the Maasai, it was intricate beadwork. For the Mayans, jade. For early Chinese dynasties, silk. Across oceans and centuries, humans have built entire systems around the emotional charge of rare and beautiful things. The strange part is how universal the response is. Gold glitters the same way everywhere. It triggers the same awe in a child in Mumbai as it does in a banker in New York. Neuroscientists have found that when people look at shiny surfaces, the brain's reward centers light up. The same areas activated by food or affection. To desire gold or beauty or status is not taught, it's inherited. That's why money would later feel so natural to us. It didn't invent desire, it simply organized it. Coins became a way to measure emotions that already existed: pride, greed, fear, security, admiration. Behind every coin, there was always something invisible, the quiet psychology of wanting to matter. Over time, our relationship with objects deepened. Possession became identity. What we owned began to reflect who we were. To give something away was to give away a piece of the self. To lose something precious felt like losing safety. The emotional gravity of objects grew heavier, pulling our sense of worth along with it. Even now we cling to the same emotional logic. We keep souvenirs from trips, clothes we no longer wear, letters from people we've lost. Each object holds invisible weight. We know it's irrational, but we can't help it. Our hearts have learned to see through the eyes of attachment. The first traders who swapped shells or ornaments weren't just exchanging goods. They were testing the limits of trust and emotion. How much would someone give for beauty? What would they sacrifice for belonging? The moment those questions appeared, value became something psychological, a story the mind tells itself about meaning. And like all good stories, it needs belief to survive. Imagine a young woman in an ancient village wearing a bright shell necklace her father gave her. To her, it's priceless. To a stranger, it's just a shell. The necklace carries two values at once, personal and collective. Its personal value lives in her memory, her love, her pride. Its collective value depends on whether others agree it's worth something. If they do, it can be traded. If they don't, it's just decoration. This duality, private emotion and public agreement, still defines money today. The stock market, the housing market, even the value of a single dollar all rest on shared emotion. We believe something is worth more when others agree it is. Consensus becomes reality. That's what makes value so slippery. It's both deeply personal and utterly social. It lives inside us, yet depends on everyone else. The story of precious things is really the story of projection, of pouring our emotions into matter and calling it worth. A golden crown is only metal until someone believes it means power. A diamond is just carbon until someone believes it means love. Our faith gives them meaning, and once that meaning spreads, it becomes nearly impossible to undo. In this way, the psychology of precious things built the foundation for civilization's most powerful illusion. That value is found in the object, not the belief. But if you look closely, the truth still shimmers beneath the surface. Every price tag hides an emotion. Every treasure hides a story. Every piece of gold still reflects a kind of longing, for permanence, for recognition, for something pure that time cannot erase. Our ancestors may not have known the word value, but they lived it every day. They touched beauty and felt something stir inside them, the same feeling we still chase when we buy, collect, and covet. That quiet spark of emotion is what transformed the useless into the sacred. It's what made us reach for more than survival. It's what made us human. And from that moment forward, the world would never see objects the same way again. Chapter 3: Symbols and Stories. A small circle of metal lies in the palm of a hand. It is cold, but it carries warmth. Stamped into its surface is the face of a ruler, a mark, a word, a sign that this piece of metal means more than what it is. The first coins were not only inventions of trade, they were inventions of belief. They turned faith into something you could hold. Somewhere long ago, a leader looked out at their people and realized that power could travel. That authority didn't have to stay locked in the palace or written on stone. It could move through hands, through markets, through lives. A symbol could make that possible. So the ruler took what was already precious, gold, silver, copper, and pressed their image upon it. The coin carried not just metal, but story. It said, "This has value because I say it does, and you can trust it because you trust me." And people did. It's easy to forget how radical that idea was. For most of human history, value had been something you could touch, measure, or trade directly. Grain, livestock, salt, each carried its worth in itself, but a coin was different. A coin said, "This piece of metal stands for something else." It was the birth of abstraction, the moment the symbol began to matter more than the substance. The first coins appeared in ancient Lydia, around 600 BCE. They were simple discs of electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver, each marked with the emblem of a lion. That mark was the guarantee, a promise pressed into metal. From there the idea spread to Greece, Persia, India, China. Wherever humans gathered, the symbol followed. What began as a practical tool soon became a psychological one. Coins were proof not only of wealth, but of belonging. To carry the king's mark was to live under his story. Each exchange was an act of loyalty, a quiet nod to the authority that made trade possible. And so money became a kind of language. Each piece spoke of power, faith, and identity. When soldiers were paid in coins bearing the emperor's face, they weren't just receiving wages. They were carrying the image of the man they fought for. When merchants weighed silver in the marketplace, they weren't just counting profit. They were reaffirming a shared belief that the mark on the coin meant something true. The mind is wired for symbols. We seek meaning in shapes and images, in marks that stand for more than themselves. A coin with a face, a note with a seal, a brand with a logo. All of them work on the same principle. They compress trust into an image. They remind us who guarantees the story. But symbols also invite imagination. They allow us to stretch belief beyond the visible, to see value not only in what we hold, but in what we think it represents. That's what gives them their strange power and their danger. In the ancient world, counterfeiters were seen as traitors, not just criminals. To fake a coin was to break the social fabric itself. It wasn't about metal, it was about belief. If the mark of the ruler could be forged, then the trust of the people could be too, and when trust breaks, value dissolves. Even so, the illusion grew stronger. With every stamped coin, every seal of approval, societies learned to move faith more efficiently. Coins could travel farther than stories. They could outlast the rulers who created them. A symbol once born could survive on its own, long after its maker had vanished. That independence was new. It meant value could exist without constant reinforcement. You didn't have to know the king or see the gold behind the promise. You just had to believe that others believed, and that belief, collective, quiet, unconscious, became the real engine of value. It's the same mechanism that drives the modern world. A company's logo, a nation's flag, a currency's design. They all work because we've learned to trust symbols more than facts. A dollar bill doesn't contain wealth, it contains story. The face, the seal, the number. Each tells us, you can trust this because everyone else does. That shared story gives shape to our reality. It's why we accept slips of paper for our labor, why we check numbers on screens and feel safer when they rise. The symbols of money are not just marks of trade. They are the architecture of our collective imagination. At its core, every economy is a storytelling system. The stronger the story, the more stable the system. Ancient coins told stories of gods and kings. Modern money tells stories of nations and markets. Cryptocurrency tells stories of freedom and trust without rulers. Each one builds a world of meaning, and each one depends on belief to survive. But the story of money has never been neutral. Symbols shape how we feel, and how we feel shapes what we value. A coin stamped with a ruler's face doesn't just represent wealth, it teaches reverence. A note bearing a national emblem doesn't just mark currency, it reinforces identity. Money speaks quietly, but it speaks of power. The psychology of symbols runs deep. When something carries an image of authority, we instinctively grant it more weight. It's why ancient coins bore images of gods and modern bills bear the faces of leaders. The human mind trusts familiarity, hierarchy, presence. The symbol comforts us by implying someone is in control. And yet, once belief takes hold, the symbol no longer needs its source. The coin keeps its power even after the ruler dies. The currency endures even when the government changes. The mark itself becomes sacred, untouchable, a relic of trust that no longer requires truth. Every time you hold a piece of money, you're holding a story. You're holding the echo of a promise made by someone you've never met, and you believe it, not because of the object itself, but because you've inherited a lifetime of agreement. That's what gives money its haunting beauty. It's both deeply personal and entirely collective. It connects you to strangers across oceans and centuries. You spend, earn, save, and give not because of the metal or the paper, but because of a shared faith that began long before you were born. Symbols and stories gave value its wings. They turned belief into something portable, exchangeable, infinite. They taught us that meaning can be made, not just found, that a mark on metal could hold the weight of nations. But they also opened a door we can never quite close, because once you learn to believe in symbols, you begin to live by them, and once symbols can move without their makers, belief itself becomes the product. That is the quiet paradox of value, that what began as a story to represent truth slowly became a truth made only of story. And as the symbols spread and multiplied, they would one day grow so light, so abstract, that they would leave even metal behind. The next illusion was waiting, paper. The promise written, not stamped. The symbol that could travel farther than any coin, because it required not just trust in power, but faith in imagination itself. Chapter 4: The Paper Illusion. In the beginning, money was heavy. It clinked in pockets, weighed down pouches, and demanded the strength of guards and horses to move. Every coin carried its own proof, a solidness that could be seen and touched. Then one day, humanity made a remarkable decision, to let go of the weight, to trust not in metal, but in promises written on air-thin sheets of paper. It was not just an economic shift. It was a psychological leap into imagination. The first paper money appeared in China during the Tang dynasty, but it was the Song dynasty, around the 11th century, that gave it life. Merchants, tired of hauling bags of heavy coins across mountains and rivers, began to deposit their metal in trusted shops. In return, they received slips of paper, handwritten notes promising redemption upon return. The idea was simple but revolutionary. The note had no value of its own, but it stood for something that did. It was a symbol of a symbol, a story of a story. At first, people hesitated. Paper was fragile. It tore, burned, and decayed. How could something so delicate carry the same authority as gold? Yet slowly, trust began to spread. The government, seeing the system's efficiency, stepped in. Officials printed standardized notes, sealed with stamps and signatures of the emperor. On each one was written the promise, "This note is as good as coin." That line changed everything. It wasn't the ink that gave paper its worth. It was belief. A collective agreement that words could hold the same power as metal. To accept paper as money required a leap of imagination, the willingness to see value not in what is, but in what could be. For the first time, the worth of money lived entirely in the mind. That mental shift unlocked an extraordinary power. Once value no longer depended on physical substance, it could move faster, reach farther, and multiply endlessly. A single note could represent entire vaults of treasure. Trade expanded, credit systems flourished, and economies began to hum with new energy. But beneath that growth lay a fragile truth. The entire system balanced on faith. If belief wavered, the illusion would crumble. Psychologically, paper money tapped into something deep within us, our love of stories. Humans are natural storytellers, and every bill is a miniature story of trust. The design, the script, the watermark, all of it tells us this is real, this matters. Each note carries a small narrative of authority, a promise whispered by a government or a bank that says, you can believe in this. And we do. When someone hands you a bill, you don't question its history. You don't check the vault or demand to see the gold that once backed it. You simply accept it. That act, quiet, habitual, unconscious, is one of the most profound rituals of collective faith the human species performs. It is belief turned into motion. But belief, once freed from material anchors, grows restless. The more abstract money became, the more it tested our sense of what was real. People began to hoard notes not for their use but for what they represented: safety, potential, control. The rustle of paper became a comfort, the sight of it a kind of reassurance. Yet deep down, everyone knew the truth: it was only paper. And so began an era of illusion layered upon illusion. Banks issued notes that represented deposits of gold, and then issued more notes than the gold they had. Merchants traded promises built on other promises. The economy became a web of faith, stretching thinner and thinner, held together by confidence alone. When that confidence broke, as it sometimes did, panic spread like fire. People rushed to turn paper back into metal, desperate to touch something that felt real again. But each collapse only strengthened the illusion in the long run. After every crisis, societies rebuilt their systems of belief, adding new layers of reassurance. Seals, laws, institutions. The goal was always the same: to make the illusion feel unbreakable. Yet even as the systems grew, the psychology behind them remained ancient. The note in your hand is not so different from the carved token by the village fire. Both are promises built on memory. Both are proof that humans would rather trust imagination than isolation. Paper money also changed our relationship with time. With coins, value was immediate. You paid, you received, it was done. But a note could represent future value. It invited the idea of credit, of debt, of possibility. It made patience profitable. It made dreams measurable. The human mind began to see time as something that could be owned, sold, and exchanged. This transformation went beyond economics. It touched the soul. Suddenly, the world was not limited by what existed, but by what could be believed into existence. Nations could borrow from the future. Individuals could build lives on promises. The imagination of value became infinite. And yet the more abstract value became, the more fragile our sense of reality grew. Paper money separated us from the physical world. We no longer saw the labor behind our wealth, the land that fed us, or the hands that made what we consumed. The note replaced the thing itself. A symbol of effort stood in for effort, and soon the symbol became enough. That distance still shapes us. When we look at a dollar bill, we see not the tree it came from, nor the ink, nor the history of trade it carries. We see meaning. We see power. We see a story we have learned so well that we no longer notice it's a story. But deep down, something in us remembers the old feeling, the need to touch, to weigh, to see proof. That's why we keep cash in drawers even in the digital age. That's why a single crisp bill can still feel more real than a number on a screen. The body still craves evidence of trust. The paper illusion was not a lie. It was a mirror. a reflection of how far our faith in one another could reach. It showed that value is not found in the object, but in the promise behind it, that we could agree collectively to make meaning from nothing more than ink and intention. But illusions have momentum. Once they begin, they rarely stop. The paper promise was only the beginning. As centuries passed, we would take one more step away from the tangible world, away from even paper, into something invisible, weightless, and everywhere. The world would one day wake up to find that money no longer lived in pockets or purses, but in screens, networks, and minds. The illusion, once written, would become pure light. Chapter 5: The Emotional Weight of Gold. Gold is strange. It does nothing, yet it means everything. It cannot feed you, heal you, or keep you warm, but hold it in your hand and something ancient stirs. It feels solid in a world that never stops moving. It shines with a light that doesn't fade. It promises permanence in a life that is anything but permanent. That promise, more than its beauty or rarity, is what made gold the heart of human value. When early humans first found gold, it must have seemed like a miracle. It lay buried in rivers and rock, untouched by time. It didn't rust like iron or tarnish like copper. It gleamed as if it carried the sun inside it. People shaped it into ornaments, crowns, and offerings. It became a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Temples stored it as proof of faith. Rulers hoarded it as proof of power. Gold didn't just symbolize wealth, it symbolized the eternal. In every corner of the world, without contact or shared language, humanity reached the same conclusion: gold was special. It appeared in tombs of pharaohs, in shrines of kings, in the trade routes of distant tribes. It transcended culture because it spoke to something universal: the human need to find something that lasts. The psychology behind gold's allure is older than civilization. We are drawn to brightness. The human brain, shaped by millennia of survival, associates gleaming light with safety. Sunlight, fire, water. Gold reflects that same living glow. When we see it, our brains respond as if we're seeing something alive. That small pulse of emotion, fascination mixed with comfort, made gold irresistible long before it became money. But beyond its visual charm lies something deeper. Gold is a mirror of our longing for certainty. We live in a world of decay and loss. Everything we touch breaks, fades, or ends. Gold, however, stays the same. It resists time. It becomes a kind of emotional anchor, a piece of eternity you can hold. That feeling became the foundation for centuries of belief. When societies began to trade across continents, gold became the universal language of trust. No matter who you were or where you came from, everyone recognized its worth. You could walk into a foreign market, open your hand, and the shimmer of gold would speak for you. It said, "This has value," and everyone understood. In time, nations began to shape their entire economies around it. Coins of gold became the ultimate proof of wealth. Later, when paper money spread, people still needed reassurance. So governments promised that every bill could be redeemed for gold. This was the birth of the gold standard, a global pact of faith, an agreement that behind every symbol of value, there was something pure and unchanging. Psychologically, the gold standard was not about economics. It was about comfort. It told people that no matter how abstract money became, there was still something real behind it, a solid promise waiting in the vault. Gold was not just a metal, it was a feeling, a collective sigh of relief. But the comfort came with a cost. The faith we placed in gold became dependency. It limited our ability to adapt, to imagine value beyond the tangible. Governments discovered that while gold brought trust, it also brought chains. They could not create more wealth than the metal they held, no matter how much the world around them grew. The illusion of permanence, once a source of strength, became a cage. And yet, even after nations broke free from gold's grip, its emotional power remained. To this day, when economies falter, people rush back to gold. Its price rises not because it becomes more useful, but because fear does. In moments of crisis, humans reach for what feels eternal. We buy gold not for profit, but for reassurance, a way to hold stability in our trembling hands. There is something almost spiritual about that instinct. When the future feels uncertain, we look for symbols that outlast us. For some, it's faith. For others, it's love. But for many, it's gold. It glows with the illusion of control, a light that never dims even as the world around it shifts. If you visit a gold market today, you can see the old story still alive. Rows of jewelry gleam under warm lights. Buyers run their fingers along the metal, testing its weight. There's a quiet reverence in the air. It feels less like a transaction and more like a ritual. Gold isn't just bought, it's believed in. Each purchase carries a silent prayer. May this keep me safe, may this last. That's the paradox of gold. Its value depends on the very emotions it seems to transcend. We say it is eternal, but its worth rises and falls with our fear and faith. It shines the same in every age, but we project onto it whatever our hearts most crave: power, beauty, safety, meaning. Even those who claim to reject its allure still feel its pull. The wedding band, the Olympic medal, the gilded frame. Gold hides in symbols of love, victory, and art. It has woven itself into our psychology so completely that we barely notice how much of our emotional life it carries. Maybe that's why gold feels so human. It reflects both our hope for permanence and our fear of loss. It holds our contradictions, fragile creatures seeking forever. It reminds us that our need for value has always been emotional before it was rational. In a way, gold's story is our story. It began as wonder, became faith, then turned into a system, a mirror of our need to trust something solid, even if that solidity is imagined. And though we've built newer, faster, more complex forms of money, nothing has ever replaced the comfort of its quiet glow. When people say gold has intrinsic value, what they really mean is emotional value. The feeling it gives us when the world feels uncertain. We trust gold not because it's logical, but because it's ancient, because it has watched empires rise and fall and never changed, because it reminds us that, in a fleeting world, something might endure. But one day, even gold would lose its throne. Humanity would take another leap, away from solidity, away from shine, towards something invisible. The world would realize that trust could live without metal, that belief itself was enough. When that moment came, the weight of gold, physical and emotional, would begin to fade, and what replaced it would be lighter, faster, and infinitely more fragile, the faith in a promise with nothing behind it but words. The world was ready to let go of the glow. Chapter 6: The Fear of Letting Go. For thousands of years, gold had been the anchor. It shone behind every promise, sat beneath every note, whispered a steady assurance that value was real and resting somewhere safe. but by the middle of the 20th century, the world began to outgrow it. The machinery of modern life was moving too fast for metal. Nations were rebuilding after war, industries were exploding, and economies were learning to move at the speed of belief. The gold that had once steadied the human imagination was starting to hold it back. Still, letting go of gold was not just an economic act, it was an emotional one. For generations, gold had been our symbol of safety, the thing we could point to when everything else felt uncertain. To break from it meant to break from the illusion of permanence itself, and that frightened people more than they cared to admit. In the decades leading up to the end of the gold standard, the world was already learning what it felt like to live inside pure faith. Paper money had long since replaced metal in people's hands, but behind that paper sat vaults filled with gold, silent, gleaming proof that the stories printed on currency were backed by something tangible. If all else failed, you could still trade your paper for the metal that had survived empires. That quiet assurance gave weight to every transaction, like a secret promise whispered beneath the noise of trade. Then in 1971, that whisper stopped. When President Nixon announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold, the world stepped fully into the age of abstraction. For the first time, money was no longer tied to anything physical. It floated freely, supported only by the faith of those who used it. The dollar's value was now a reflection not of metal, but of belief. The change was shocking, but it was also strangely invisible. The average person still went to work, still earned and spent as before. The bills looked the same, the coins still clinked. The illusion was unbroken because it was psychological, not physical. People didn't need to see the gold to feel its ghost. They trusted the habit, the rhythm, the continuity of the story. Yet deep down, something shifted. A faint anxiety began to hum beneath the surface of modern life. The question that had been buried under centuries of certainty began to rise again. What makes this worth anything at all? The human mind struggles with the abstract. We crave anchors, evidence, something we can see and hold. Without them, our sense of stability wavers. When money became pure belief, it asked us to trust systems we could no longer touch. Governments, central banks, markets, screens. It asked us to surrender control and replace it with faith. For many, that faith came easily. The new world of floating currencies offered freedom. Economies could expand without the weight of limited gold reserves. Growth could be imagined into existence. Credit and investment surged. The future felt open again, flexible, creative, limitless. But for others, the loss of gold felt like betrayal. It was as if the foundation of reality had quietly shifted beneath their feet. They looked at paper money and saw not progress, but a trick. They saw promises without proof. Some began hoarding gold again, burying coins in safes and soil, guarding it like a secret truth in a world of illusions. Their fear wasn't greed, it was memory, a longing for something solid in a time that had become all air and numbers. That longing never really went away. Even today, when digital screens show balances that exist only as pixels, the human need for tangibility remains. Investors still speak of safe havens. Ads still call gold real money. When markets shake, the old reflex returns. We reach for what we can hold, because somewhere deep in our psychology, the weight of gold still equals peace. The fear of letting go is not unique to money. It's woven into the human condition. We hold on to the familiar even when it limits us, because letting go means stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty feels like falling. The gold standard was more than an economic system. It was a metaphor for how we navigate life. We crave anchors, things that seem unchanging, even when we know that change is the only constant. There's a strange comfort in thinking that something outside of us can keep us safe, that if we just cling to the right object, rule, or belief, the chaos will stay away. Gold played that role perfectly. It was the shining proof that stability existed somewhere in the world. It told us that value could be stored, that trust could be held, that meaning could be measured in ounces. But once gold was gone, we had to find that stability elsewhere. We began to build it not in vaults, but in systems, in numbers, in graphs, in institutions. The language of faith changed. The priest became the banker, the scripture became the market report. The rituals of reassurance continued in new forms, but the yearning beneath them remained the same. And just as belief once gave gold its power, belief now gave numbers theirs. We began to worship statistics, credit ratings, and interest rates, symbols that promised safety through calculation. But the comfort was thinner now, more fragile. A number could vanish in a day, a stock could crash in an hour, a lifetime of savings could disappear in a flash of uncertainty. The illusion had become lighter, faster, more fragile, and so had our peace of mind. Yet for all its instability, the world without gold also brought something quietly liberating. Freed from the metal's weight, value became imagination again. Nations could grow, innovate, and recover faster. Wealth became more fluid, more dynamic. Humanity, once bound by the limits of the earth, began to build an economy of mind. A world powered not by what we had, but by what we could believe into being. It's easy to see the end of the gold standard as the loss of something pure, but perhaps it was also a sign of growth, a collective coming of age. For the first time, we accepted that value doesn't need a body, that trust, though invisible, is real enough to move the world. Still, the fear lingers. You can see it in the way people talk about markets, always with a trace of superstition, as if speaking too boldly might break the spell. You can feel it in the tension between faith and doubt that runs through every economic cycle. We've let go of gold, but we haven't yet learned to let go of the need for certainty. Maybe that's the deeper truth behind money's evolution. Every time we shed an old form of value, we confront our own dependence on belief. Each transformation, from shells to coins, from paper to data, is less about progress and more about trust. The fear of letting go is really the fear of being the only one who believes, because money, at its heart, is not about what we hold. It's about what we hold together. And so, even after the last link to gold was broken, humanity did what it has always done. It kept believing. It turned its faith towards something even lighter, even less visible, something that could slip through the air at the speed of thought. The world was ready for the next illusion. The invisible dollar, made not of metal or paper, but of light. Chapter 7: Invisible Numbers, Real Feelings. There's a strange comfort in holding money, the weight of coins, the crispness of bills, the quiet proof that value exists somewhere outside your imagination. But one day that comfort began to fade. The coins disappeared. The paper grew thinner, then one day it stopped appearing at all. Money no longer lived in pockets or drawers. It lived in screens. The symbols of worth became numbers, glowing softly, weightless, untouchable. And yet, those invisible digits would come to rule almost every heartbeat of modern life. The invisible dollar was not born in a single moment. It crept in quietly, like light replacing shadow. Credit cards, bank accounts, digital ledgers. Each step removed one more layer of tangibility. For most people, the transition seemed harmless. Convenience disguised transformation. Swiping a card felt the same as handing over cash. Checking a balance on a screen felt like looking into a wallet. But something profound had changed. Money was no longer a thing. It was a signal. That signal pulsed everywhere, through wires, across satellites, between servers humming in dark rooms. Money became code, stored and moved by machines, translated into the language of data. The system was clean, efficient, invisible. But for the human heart, it carried new tensions. When value becomes weightless, so does our sense of control. The old reassurance of seeing and touching our wealth was replaced by a glowing promise that could vanish with a glitch, a hack, a keystroke. People began to feel money differently. It was no longer an object to keep or hold. It was a presence to monitor. We began to live in quiet companionship with our balances, checking them daily, hourly, obsessively. Numbers became emotions. Comfort when they rose, anxiety when they fell. The balance between safety and fear grew thinner, flickering with every transaction. The psychology of digital money runs deeper than we admit. To the logical mind, numbers are neutral, but to the emotional mind, they carry weight. A growing balance feels like accomplishment, a shrinking one feels like loss. Even though nothing physical changes, our bodies react as if we're holding or losing something tangible. A screen refresh can tighten the chest, quicken the pulse, just like watching a wave of real coins spill away. This is the new illusion, that something so abstract can feel so real. We have trained ourselves to trust symbols so completely that we no longer need evidence of their existence. We see digits on a screen and feel safe. We see them disappear and feel threatened. Yet the digits are not wealth, they are representations of faith. They exist because we, and everyone around us, agree that they do. In the digital age, money became more psychological than ever before. It began to live in our heads, in our expectations, fears, and self-worth. A number on a screen started to define not only what we could buy, but who we believed ourselves to be. The line between external value and internal value blurred. People began to see their worth in their balance. A low number felt like shame. A high one felt like success. This shift has changed how we see time, work, and even love. With every transaction tracked, quantified, and analyzed, life itself became measurable. Apps now chart our spending habits, rank our credit scores, predict our desires. We no longer just earn and spend. We perform, constantly adjusting our behavior to keep the numbers right. Every purchase, every click, every decision becomes data, and data becomes identity. The invisible dollar has also changed the rhythm of emotion, where money once moved slowly. From hand to hand, market to market, it now moves instantly. A digital payment crosses oceans in a blink. And with that speed comes volatility. Markets rise and fall faster than feelings can keep up. Fortunes appear and vanish overnight, leaving behind waves of quiet panic and disbelief. The faster the system moves, the more unstable our sense of security becomes. Yet strangely, people trust this weightless world more than ever. We rarely question it. We deposit paychecks we never see. We buy things we never touch with money we never hold. The system works because we've made peace with invisibility. We've come to believe that the unseen is safer than the seen. The vault has become the cloud. But deep inside, the old instincts still live. Every so often, a crash or a crisis cracks the illusion and panic spreads. Screens fill with red numbers, the faith wavers, people rush to withdraw cash, not because they need it, but because they need to feel it. That act, simple and almost ceremonial, reconnects them with something ancient, the reassurance of touch. There's a moment that happens every day, quietly, all around the world. Someone checks their bank balance at night, the light of their phone reflecting on their face. They scroll through transactions, seeing a story of their days, a coffee, a rent payment, a gift. These are not just numbers. They are memories, choices, relationships. The invisible dollar still carries the same emotional language as the coins and shells that came before. Each exchange still means trust, effort, care, or fear. We've just changed the way we see it. The more invisible money becomes, the more visible its emotions grow. It shapes our dreams, the home we long for, the freedom we imagine, the security we crave. It also shapes our fears, of loss, of failure, of being left behind. And because it exists as pure symbol, it can multiply endlessly, feeding both hope and anxiety in equal measure. In this way, digital money mirrors the modern mind, restless, fast, always connected, yet constantly searching for something real to hold onto. The illusion no longer lives in the object, it lives in us. And as we drift deeper into a world where money is made of light and code, the question that once haunted the end of gold returns in a new form. If value exists only in belief, what happens when belief becomes fragile? For now, the system holds. The numbers continue to flow, flickering between screens and hearts, quietly shaping how we think, feel, and measure our lives. But beneath the calm hum of servers and transactions, the same old truth endures, that every illusion needs faith to survive. The invisible dollar may have no weight, but it still presses on us. It carries the same ancient emotion that moved the first traders, the same longing for trust in a world too big to control. We believe in it not because it's real, but because belief itself is the most real thing we have. And so the illusion continues, brighter, faster, more seamless than ever, until one day we may forget it's an illusion at all. But soon humanity would learn to institutionalize that faith, to build entire systems designed not to trade things, but to trade belief itself. Banks would rise like cathedrals of trust, their walls holding not gold, but confidence. The next chapter in the story of value would not be about money itself, but about the machinery that keeps our faith alive. Chapter 8: The Trust Habit. Every civilization has its temples, places where the unseen becomes visible. For most of human history, those temples were made of stone, built for gods, guarded by priests, lit by candles. But in the modern age, a new kind of temple rose in every city. It was made of marble and columns, filled not with incense, but with ledgers and quiet voices. Its priests wore suits instead of robes. Its prayers were written in numbers, not hymns. This was the bank, the house of trust. From the outside, banks looked solid, eternal. Their walls were thick, their doors heavy, their architecture designed to comfort the eye. They were built to feel safe. People walked through those doors not to worship wealth, but to believe in something larger than themselves. The system that promised to keep their efforts safe, their futures possible, their faith intact. A person could walk in with paper or coin, leave with a promise, and somehow feel lighter, freer. It was the modern exchange of trust for security. The rise of banks was not simply about organizing money. It was about organizing belief. The system took humanity's oldest emotion, trust, and made it scalable. No longer did you need to know the person you traded with. You didn't have to see their honesty in their eyes or share a meal before you exchanged value. The bank became the bridge between strangers, a kind of mechanical trust machine. It allowed billions of people to cooperate without ever meeting, each relying on the same quiet faith that the numbers would hold. In the early days, this was revolutionary. Before banks, trade was limited by personal connection. You had to know someone or know someone who knew someone to trust them. With banks, that need dissolved. A piece of paper, signed and stamped, could now carry the same weight as a handshake. A deposit slip became a promise the whole society agreed to honor. The trust once built face-to-face was now built through institutions. Vast, impersonal, but dependable. Yet beneath that dependability, the psychology remained the same. People didn't believe in banks because they loved paperwork or policies. They believed because the alternative, chaos, was unbearable. Banks existed not because humans are rational, but because humans are afraid. We fear losing what we've earned. We fear uncertainty. We fear being alone in our belief. The institution offered a solution to that fear, a shared illusion of control. This is the quiet genius of the trust machine. It doesn't manufacture value, it manufactures calm. When you walk into a bank, you aren't depositing money, you're depositing emotion. You're transferring your anxiety, your uncertainty, your need for safety. And in return, you receive numbers that tell you it's all okay. Every balance statement, every withdrawal receipt, every small digital confirmation is a whisper of reassurance. You are safe. You are part of something stable. You can rest. But stability is a story we have to tell ourselves again and again, because even the strongest institutions are only as real as our faith in them. The architecture of banking is psychological first, structural second. The stone pillars and marble floors are props in a performance of certainty. The real foundation is invisible, collective belief, and like all belief, it must be maintained through ritual. The rituals of modern banking are quiet but powerful. The signature on a check, the stamp on a loan document, the moment you insert a card into an ATM and watch it come back out. These small actions reinforce the illusion that the system is alive, reliable, always watching. Every transaction is a kind of prayer to the God of continuity. Let this still work tomorrow as it does today. There's a reason banks feel sacred. Their design borrows from the architecture of religion. The high ceilings, the echoing halls, the solemn quiet. It's not accidental, it's psychological theater. In those spaces, we are reminded that money, though invisible, unstable, and imagined, still has a home. The institution gives shape to the formless. It makes belief tangible. It tells us that someone somewhere is keeping watch over the illusion. But like all temples, banks have also betrayed their believers. Throughout history, moments of collapse have revealed just how fragile the habit of trust can be. A rumor spreads. People line up outside, desperate to withdraw their savings. The marble walls echo with panic. The illusion cracks, and behind the counters and ledgers lies the truth. There is no gold waiting for everyone. The trust was never stored in vaults, it lived in minds. And when minds change, everything collapses. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, millions learned that truth the hard way. In those long lines of desperate faces, trust evaporated faster than wealth. It wasn't money that people had lost, it was belief. And when belief disappears, money becomes paper again. The cycle has repeated countless times since. Recessions, crashes, crises, each one begins not with mathematics, but with emotion. Fear spreads faster than numbers. Faith evaporates quicker than gold. Still, after every collapse, people return. They rebuild their trust, brick by brick, number by number, because the habit of belief is stronger than memory. We can know the illusion and still depend on it. We can see the cracks and still call it home. That is the paradox of money, that even after betrayal, we return to the system that failed us because we cannot imagine life without it. The trust machine has evolved over time, becoming more abstract with each generation. Today, banks exist mostly as interfaces, glowing apps, screens filled with balances and transactions. The grand halls of marble have been replaced by websites and passwords. The rituals are now digital, tapping to pay, confirming to transfer, logging in to check. The trust feels lighter, quicker, less visible, but it still runs on the same emotion. When you see the confirmation message, transaction complete. The relief is the same as it was 100 years ago when a teller handed you a stamped deposit slip. We live now in an age of invisible institutions. The trust machine has merged with the digital illusion, creating systems so vast and automated that no single person truly understands them. We've replaced the human face of reassurance with the quiet hum of algorithms, and while the system feels efficient, it also feels distant. It's harder to feel safe when the one you trust has no name or voice. Still, we keep believing. We tell ourselves that as long as the app opens, as long as the numbers remain, everything is fine. And most days it is. The illusion holds because it has become a habit, a daily rhythm we no longer question. The same way our ancestors trusted the harvest, or the gods, or the king's mark on a coin, we now trust the glowing digits on a screen. The story of the bank is not about finance. It's about faith adapted for modern life. The human need to trust has simply found new walls to echo in, and though the architecture has changed, the emotion remains the same. Beneath the technology, beneath the algorithms and interest rates, we are still whispering the same old prayer: let it hold, let it last, let tomorrow be just as safe as today. Because deep down we know the truth, that money has never been about wealth alone. It has always been about belonging, belief, and the fragile comfort of knowing that someone, somewhere, is keeping the story alive. But what happens when that trust begins to shake again? Not because of war or failure, but because of something deeper. When the illusion begins to bend under its own complexity, and the story of certainty starts to sound uncertain. The cracks in the mirror always return, and when they do, we face a question older than gold and younger than tomorrow. What do we hold on to when faith begins to slip? Chapter 9: Cracks in the Mirror. Trust is invisible until it breaks. When the system hums quietly, when numbers rise and paychecks arrive and cards swipe without pause, faith feels automatic. We don't notice it. We don't question it. We simply live inside it. But all illusions, no matter how convincing, eventually tremble. And when they do, the air changes. The calm rhythm of belief begins to shake, and for the first time in a long time, people remember that value isn't real. It's agreed upon. Every financial collapse is, at its heart, an emotional event. On paper, the numbers tell one story: markets falling, prices rising, currencies slipping. But beneath the surface, the real story is always about fear. Fear spreading faster than facts. Fear turning trust into panic. Fear revealing how thin the veil between order and chaos truly is. Imagine the first few moments of a crisis. A headline flashes, the market has fallen. The words seem small at first, almost abstract, but then something shifts. People begin to move their money, to call their banks, to ask quiet questions they haven't asked in years. The fear catches like fire, because the truth is simple. Money only works when people believe in it. And belief, once shaken, collapses faster than any building ever could. You can trace this pattern through history. The Great Depression, the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, the 2008 financial crisis. Each one unfolded differently, but at their core they all told the same human story. Too much faith turned to too little too fast. The cycle of greed and fear, expansion and collapse, trust and doubt, repeating endlessly, each time teaching us the same fragile truth. During the Great Depression, banks failed by the thousands. Ordinary people who had spent their lives believing in the safety of their savings woke up to find their money gone. Not stolen, not spent, but simply erased by the loss of faith. The same trust that had built the system now turned against it. People lined up outside banks, desperate to withdraw what no longer existed. The air was thick with disbelief. They weren't just losing money. They were losing the story they'd built their lives around. In Weimar Germany, the illusion cracked in another way. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. Prices doubled in days, then in hours. People carried stacks of bills in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Children played with worthless notes, folding them into kites and paper chains. The government kept printing, hoping to restore faith with more symbols, more promises. But each note printed said the opposite of what it meant. The promise is empty now. The illusion is gone. In 2008, the cracks appeared again, this time hidden beneath the glass towers of modern finance. Complex systems built on confidence began to unwind, revealing that the trust we'd placed in numbers, models, and institutions had been faith in disguise. The moment people stopped believing the story of endless growth, the system froze. Stocks fell. Homes were lost. The abstract became painfully human again. Each collapse carries the same emotional rhythm. First disbelief, then anger, then grief. The grief is not just for lost wealth, but for lost certainty. We grieve the world we thought we understood, the one where money was steady, systems were stable, and the future was predictable. When the illusion breaks, we realize how much of our peace depended on not asking questions. But there's something revealing about these moments of collapse. They show us that value never disappears. It migrates. When money loses meaning, people turn their faith elsewhere. In crisis, the illusion shifts from numbers to necessities. Food, shelter, safety, family. Value returns to what is visible, human, and immediate. The mind begins to simplify again, peeling away the layers of abstraction until only survival remains. That's why in the aftermath of every collapse there are always two kinds of rebuilding, economic and emotional. The economic recovery restores the systems, the banks, the numbers. But the emotional recovery takes longer. It requires the slow rebuilding of trust, the quiet, invisible work of believing again, and that belief never returns in the same way. Once you've seen behind the curtain, faith becomes cautious, tender, and wary. Psychologists call this trust trauma. Once a belief has been broken, the mind struggles to rebuild it fully. You still participate in the system, but a part of you never stops watching for cracks. You check balances more often. You save more, spend less. You hesitate to take risks. The illusion reforms, but it's thinner now, like glass that has been shattered and glued back together. And yet, despite everything, we keep rebuilding. Humanity cannot live without trust. It is the glue that binds every system, every relationship, every hope for the future. Without it, we fall apart. So we return to the illusion again and again, not because we are foolish, but because we are human. Belief, after all, is not a flaw in our nature. It's our foundation. Sometimes the cracks in the mirror serve a purpose. They remind us that value is not something external, handed down by markets or governments. It is something we create together. Every collapse, painful as it is, reveals how much power we have as believers. When faith disappears, so does the system, which means that the system was never more powerful than the people who believed in it. In a strange way, that realization can be freeing. When we understand that value lives in our minds, not in our vaults, we begin to see through the illusion, not to destroy it, but to hold it more gently. We stop mistaking symbols for reality. We learn to look past the numbers, the screens, the glittering towers, and see the human emotions holding them up: fear, hope, cooperation, trust. And maybe that's what every crisis is trying to teach us, that no illusion, no matter how grand, can erase the fact that money is a mirror. When the mirror cracks, we don't lose truth, we see it more clearly. We see the reflection for what it is, not solid, not eternal, but shared. Still, the cycle continues. The mirror mends, the faith returns, the systems hum again. But each time the illusion grows more subtle, more refined. We learn to hide the cracks better. We create new forms of belief, new systems of faith, new technologies that promise to be unbreakable. And so, after every collapse, a new promise rises from the ashes. A promise of purity, of independence, of a world where trust no longer needs middlemen, where belief can be built into the system itself. That promise, too, would find its form, not in gold, not in paper, not even in banks, but in code. The next illusion would not ask for trust in governments or institutions. It would offer something more radical: trust in mathematics, in machines, in a network of believers bound by nothing but faith in each other. It would call itself freedom, and it would look, for a time, like truths. Chapter 10: The New Myths of Money. Every era needs a new story to believe in. When the old faith begins to falter, we build a new one, shaped by the same emotions but dressed in different symbols. The last century ended with a quiet sense of fatigue, a tiredness with the institutions that once anchored our trust. Banks felt too distant, governments too powerful, money too manipulated. The people who grew up watching markets crash and currencies crumble began to ask an ancient question in a modern tongue: what if we could make value pure again? That question birthed a new myth. It began with a few lines of code and an idea. That trust didn't have to depend on human beings at all. That belief could be stored in algorithms, not vaults. That faith could live in a system that no single person controlled, where every transaction would be truth written in light. The dream had a name: cryptocurrency. It arrived not as a revolution of wealth, but as a rebellion of faith. In 2008, as the world was reeling from financial collapse, a mysterious figure called Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper describing Bitcoin, a digital currency that existed nowhere and everywhere at once. Its creation was perfectly timed. People were losing trust in banks, governments, and the entire machinery of modern finance. Bitcoin offered a new story, a currency beyond corruption, born from code instead of decree. At its core, Bitcoin was more psychological than technological. It promised a return to purity, the idea that money could once again be tied to truth. Each coin existed because a network of believers agreed it did. Each transaction was verified not by authority, but by consensus. In this way, it wasn't so different from the oldest forms of value. It was belief, just updated for the digital age. But belief, as history has shown, is a double-edged sword. The early adopters saw themselves as pioneers in a new kind of trust. They spoke of decentralization as liberation, a way to remove middlemen, corruption, and control. They dreamed of a world where power flowed horizontally, where everyone could see the same ledger, where honesty was built into the system. The blockchain, the underlying technology, was hailed as unbreakable. It would replace faith with proof. Yet even proof is a kind of belief. The code might be perfect, but the people using it are not. Behind every screen sat the same human heart, with the same old fears and desires. The dream of digital trust began to mirror the systems it had promised to replace. Exchanges were hacked, coins were lost, fortunes were made and vanished overnight. New myths arose. Of geniuses and frauds, of believers and skeptics, of those who said they were saving the world, and those who were simply chasing another version of gold. Still, the myth endured because it spoke to something primal. It told people that they could take back control of the story. That trust could be personal again, private again, something built from the bottom up instead of handed down from above. For many, crypto wasn't about profit. It was about identity, about belonging to a movement that felt like the future. The language surrounding it became almost spiritual. The blockchain was called a truth machine. Bitcoin was digital gold. Investors became hodlers, faithful to the cause through every rise and crash. White papers read like scriptures, forums buzzed like congregations, and like every faith before it, this one was built on the tension between hope and fear, the hope of freedom and the fear of control. To outsiders, the movement looked volatile, unstable, absurd. But to those inside it, volatility was the price of vision. They believed they were building something eternal, a money that could not be printed, corrupted, or erased. In a world where trust had been broken too many times, they were creating a version that needed no trust at all. Yet beneath the noise of speculation and hype, something quietly profound was happening. The human species was learning, once again, that value lives in the collective mind. The same psychological forces that once made shells sacred and gold divine were now shaping lines of digital code. Each new cryptocurrency, each token, each digital collectible, all of them were experiments in shared imagination, proof that the illusion of value is not a weakness of humanity, but its defining gift. What the blockchain revealed more than anything was that belief itself could be engineered. It could be written, distributed, and multiplied across networks. It could exist without a single point of failure. But in making belief so efficient, we also made it more fragile. The faster an illusion spreads, the faster it can collapse. And in the digital age, collapses happen at the speed of light. The crypto crashes that followed were not failures of technology. They were reminders of psychology. The same greed that once inflated bubbles in tulips, railroads, and housing now inflated virtual coins. The same panic that once emptied banks now emptied digital wallets. The illusion had changed shape, but the emotions beneath it hadn't changed at all. Still, something important lingers in this new myth. It's the same seed that sprouted in the dawn of trade, the same instinct that drove people to carve tokens and stamp coins and print paper. The desire to believe together, the hunger to find meaning in exchange, to create trust, even when trust feels impossible. Every generation builds its own version of this illusion. Crypto may not be the final form of money, but it reveals the direction we're heading, toward a world where value is more fluid, more personal, more psychological than ever before. A world where money feels less like an object and more like an emotion, a shared pulse that flows through networks of thought and belief. And yet, even as technology changes the surface of value, the undercurrent remains the same. The new myths of money still orbit the same old truths, that trust is fragile, that faith is contagious, and that we will always need something, anything, to hold our collective imagination together. Perhaps the real innovation of cryptocurrency isn't in the code at all. It's in the mirror it holds up to us. It shows that the illusion of value is no longer something that happens to us. It's something we now participate in consciously. We are not just believers, we are creators. But as we step deeper into this digital frontier, another truth begins to emerge. While we continue to chase freedom through technology, something quieter is happening beneath the surface. A new kind of value is forming, one that can't be mined, coded, or exchanged, a form of wealth that lives not in ledgers but in emotion. Because even in a world built on algorithms, it is still human feeling, not data. That drives the story forward, and soon money will take on a new face entirely, not gold, not paper, not even code, but emotion itself. The currency of attention, affection, and meaning. Chapter 11: The Emotional Exchange. There's a moment that happens quietly every day. Someone gives a gift, pays a bill, buys a meal, or sends a small amount of money to a friend. The transaction is simple, almost mechanical, but beneath it flows a deep current of feeling. Gratitude, guilt, pride, love, fear. All hidden beneath the act of exchange. We think we're trading money for things, but we're really trading emotion for connection. Every dollar spent carries a trace of how we want to feel and how we want to be seen. In truth, money has always been emotional. From the first bartered fish to the most complex financial instrument, every act of exchange has been shaped by what the heart desires. Safety, belonging, status, respect, care. We rarely say it out loud, but most of what we spend, save, or give is an attempt to feel something. The illusion of value has always been built not on math, but on meaning. Imagine a child offering a crumpled dollar to buy a gift for their parent. The object doesn't matter. What matters is the gesture. In that moment, the dollar becomes something sacred. Its worth has nothing to do with what it can buy and everything to do with what it represents. Love expressed through effort. The same psychology plays out across our entire adult lives. Every purchase, every gift, every act of generosity or withholding is part of a quiet emotional language we've been speaking since childhood. Psychologists call this the symbolic meaning of money. It's the understanding that currency isn't neutral. It's loaded with feeling. To give is to reveal care. To refuse is to withhold connection. To spend freely can signal confidence or recklessness, depending on the story we tell ourselves. We may think we're using money logically, but emotion is the invisible hand that guides every choice. When we spend on others, we often buy more than goods. We buy reassurance. We buy belonging. A meal shared with a friend is rarely about food. It's about acknowledgement, about being seen and valued. When we pay for something expensive, it's often a way to confirm to ourselves that we're allowed to want more. When we save obsessively, it's not just preparation. It's control, a way to keep fear at bay. The emotional weight of money also shows up in the smallest rituals. Splitting a bill, choosing a gift, tipping at a restaurant. Each moment carries a subtle dance of meaning. We gauge fairness, kindness, status, even affection. A few extra dollars left on a table might say thank you or I care. A small underpayment might whisper I'm unsure, I'm afraid, or I need to protect myself. These transactions form a kind of emotional map that shapes how we navigate relationships. Money doesn't just reflect how we feel, it also shapes how we see ourselves. When we have enough, we often feel capable, generous, open. When we don't, we feel small, restricted, invisible. These are not just economic states, they are psychological ones. Wealth and poverty both leave fingerprints on the soul. The person with plenty may fear losing it. The person with little may fear never being enough. Both are haunted by the same ghost, the idea that worth can be measured. In romantic relationships, money often becomes a silent third partner. It carries the weight of fairness, power, and care. Couples argue about it not because of the numbers, but because of what those numbers symbolize. A shared account can feel like intimacy or control. A secret purchase can feel like betrayal. Behind every financial conversation lies a deeper question. Who gives, who sacrifices, who is seen, who is safe? Even in families, money weaves its quiet influence. Parents teach their children what to believe about worth, not through words but through emotion, the tone of voice when bills arrive, the arguments behind closed doors, the small joys or anxieties around spending. These early moments become templates for adult life. A child who grows up seeing money as danger may spend adulthood trying to escape fear through control. A child who sees money as love may grow up believing that affection must always be earned. Our culture reinforces these patterns. We're taught to tie emotion to consumption, to soothe sadness with buying, to celebrate love with gifts, to measure success by what can be shown. The marketplace has learned to speak directly to our hearts. Advertisements don't sell objects anymore, they sell feelings. Freedom, confidence, happiness. Every brand is a psychologist now, learning to translate longing into purchase. But something subtle has shifted in recent decades. Money has started to move even deeper into the emotional core of our lives, into places it never used to belong. We no longer just exchange it for goods or services. We exchange it for attention, validation, and even identity. A person tips not just for service, but to signal kindness. Donations are shared online not just to help, but to be seen helping. Even generosity, once private, has become performative. Another form of emotional currency in a world obsessed with visibility. Technology has made this transformation faster and more intimate. Payment apps carry the same emotional tone as messages. A few taps on a phone can express apology, gratitude, affection, or guilt. Here's for lunch. Thanks again. Sorry about that. The transaction is the message. Money has become a language, one that speaks both love and distance. This blending of emotion and value reveals a truth that has always been hiding in plain sight. We don't use money to buy things. We use it to manage feelings, to feel safe, to feel worthy, to feel connected. The illusion of value is not just external, it's internal. We believe that money will bridge the gap between who we are and who we want to be. And yet, no matter how much we trade, the gap remains, because emotion cannot be settled like a debt. Love cannot be bought, only reflected. Worth cannot be stored, only felt. We keep spending in the hope of closing a distance that money was never meant to cross. Still, there's beauty in this illusion, because even if it's not real in the way we imagine, it shows how deeply human we are. The fact that we try to express care, apology, pride, or gratitude through something as abstract as currency is proof of our endless creativity. We turn symbols into feelings and feelings into connection. Even our illusions are made of love. Perhaps that's what keeps the emotional exchange alive. The quiet hope that beneath the numbers, something real is still being shared. Every dollar passed between people carries a trace of warmth, a whisper of belief that meaning can move from one heart to another. And as the world becomes increasingly digital, where attention and emotion can be measured, traded, and monetized, a new kind of currency is emerging. One not made of money at all, a currency of likes, followers, views, and validation. It doesn't live in wallets or accounts, but in minds. It doesn't promise stability, only recognition, and it's beginning to shape how we value not just things, but ourselves. The next illusion is already here. One that doesn't trade gold or paper or even code, but the human desire to be seen. Chapter 12: The Price of Self-Worth. There was a time when value existed outside of us, in gold, in land, in trade. Then it moved into paper, into numbers, into code. But somewhere along the way, it found a new home, inside the self. The most powerful illusion of modern life is not that money has value, but that we do, and that our worth can somehow be measured in the same way. This shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as opportunity and progress. As work became more visible, as success became more shareable, the lines between personal worth and material value began to blur. We stopped seeing money as a tool and started seeing it as a mirror. What once represented what we had began to represent who we were. It's easy to forget how recent this transformation is. In earlier centuries, identity was shaped by family, faith, and place. A person's worth was social, not financial. You were a farmer, a merchant, a teacher. Not rich or poor in the way we now define those words. Money was something you used, not something you were. But the rise of markets, media, and technology changed that. As societies grew more individualistic, the self became a kind of currency. And like all currency, it began to fluctuate. Today we live in an economy of comparison. We don't measure our worth in isolation, but in contrast. A salary, a title, a home, a number of followers. Each becomes a data point in an invisible ranking system. The illusion whispers that if we could only climb high enough, earn enough, become enough, then the balance would finally feel settled. But self-worth measured this way is a debt that can never be repaid. Social media poured fuel on this illusion. The digital world made success visible and constant. Every scroll is a parade of curated lives, a highlight reel of achievement, beauty, and abundance. It creates an unspoken equation. To be valuable is to be seen, and to be seen is to be valuable. We perform ourselves into worth. We post, share, accumulate, and optimize, not just for connection, but for proof. Proof that we matter in a system that monetizes attention as ruthlessly as it once mined gold. Psychologists call this the externalization of worth. Instead of finding validation within, we seek it in metrics. Likes, income, recognition, applause. It's a fragile way to live because it ties the stability of our inner world to forces beyond our control. When the numbers rise, we feel alive. When they fall, we feel invisible. The same system that promises empowerment also breeds quiet despair. This despair is not loud or dramatic. It's subtle, woven into the background of modern ambition. It hums through offices, classrooms, and homes. It shows up in late-night anxiety, in endless work hours, in the quiet shame of never feeling like enough. The illusion of self-worth turns every success into a temporary reprieve, every failure into a crisis. We are no longer earning money. We are earning permission to feel worthy. But self-worth, like value, is not something that can be earned. It is not transactional. It cannot be stored, accumulated, or displayed. And yet, the culture of modern economics tells us otherwise. It rewards visibility over depth, performance over peace. We are encouraged to brand ourselves, to turn personality into product, experience into content, life into labor. The more we blur the line between who we are and what we produce, the harder it becomes to rest without feeling unproductive. This new economy of the self has created a quiet exhaustion, a generation of people trying to monetize their existence while longing to simply exist. We are told to invest in ourselves, maximize potential, build personal value. But these phrases, while empowering on the surface, carry a hidden cost. They reduce the mystery of being human to a marketplace of measurable outcomes. It's not that money or ambition are wrong. They are part of what moves life forward. The danger lies in mistaking external success for internal peace. When the mind learns to equate worth with performance, rest begins to feel like failure. And in that confusion, even joy starts to feel expensive. There's an irony here. The more we chase self-worth through value, the further we drift from it. Because worth, in its truest form, isn't earned or compared. It's inherent. It's the quiet sense of enoughness that exists before the first transaction, before the first applause. It's the same sense that ancient humans felt when trade was still a gesture of trust, not a measure of status. But the illusion of measurable worth persists because it serves the machinery of modern life. Economies thrive when people feel insufficient, when every product, service, or platform can promise a path toward being more successful, more beautiful, more secure. The system feeds on insecurity, turning longing into demand. The result is a culture where the self is both the buyer and the product, endlessly trying to purchase completion. Even generosity, once a pure expression of connection, has been folded into this cycle. Charitable acts are shared online. Good deeds are branded. Our culture has learned to sell virtue the same way it sells luxury, as identity, as proof. We call it authenticity, but often it's performance. The more public our compassion becomes, the harder it is to know where sincerity ends and signaling begins. And yet, within this tangle of illusion, there is still something beautiful trying to emerge. The fact that we care so deeply about meaning, recognition, and belonging shows that we haven't lost what's most human about value. We still want to be seen, yes, but also understood. We still want to contribute, to matter, to be part of a shared story. These desires are not flaws, they are roots. The challenge is learning to grow them in soil that isn't for sale. Perhaps the way out of the illusion of self-worth isn't to reject ambition, but to reimagine what success feels like, to shift from achievement to alignment, from proving to being, to see that the worth we keep chasing was never meant to be found in numbers, but in connection, the quiet sense that what we do, give, and create has meaning beyond its measurable return. It takes courage to step outside a system that defines value in such narrow terms. It feels like stepping into emptiness, but in that emptiness, something honest begins to return. A slower kind of worth, one that doesn't fluctuate with fortune. It's the worth that comes from being part of the larger flow of life, from caring, from creating, from existing in harmony with others rather than in competition. We may never fully escape the illusion. The world will always find ways to turn identity into currency, but perhaps the illusion can soften. Perhaps we can learn to see the difference between being valued and having value, between being seen and being whole. Because when we finally begin to untangle our sense of worth from the systems that sell it back to us, something extraordinary happens. We begin to notice value in places where it was never meant to exist, in stillness, in kindness, in love that expects nothing in return. And that realization leads us to the next truth in this unfolding story. That in a world where even the self has been priced, a new currency has begun to take shape, one that doesn't trade in money or even self-image, but in something subtler, more seductive, and more fleeting. The currency of attention, the economy of visibility that now defines what it means to exist at all. Chapter 13, The Attention Economy. There's a quiet hum that fills the air now, the constant vibration of screens, notifications, and the unseen rush of data. Every second, billions of eyes glance, scroll, and tap, feeding a system that doesn't trade gold or paper or even digital coins, but something far more intimate, human attention. In this new economy, the most valuable resource isn't money, it's focus. And in many ways, this is the most powerful illusion of all, because what we give our attention to, we make real. The attention economy didn't arrive with a single invention. It emerged gradually, growing alongside the web, feeding on the speed of modern life and the human hunger to feel connected. At first, it seemed harmless, a new way to share, to communicate, to learn. But as the networks grew, a subtle transformation took place. Every click, like, and share became a kind of currency. The act of looking itself became monetized, and the oldest psychological impulse, the need to be seen, was suddenly measurable. This is the moment when value shifted once again, moving from the external to the internal, from wealth to awareness. The marketplace stopped selling only products and began selling attention. Every advertisement, every video, every post competes for the same scarce commodity, the human gaze. The algorithms that run our digital world don't care about truth or depth. They care about engagement, about what keeps us looking. Because in this economy, attention is the product. It's easy to underestimate how radical this change is. For the first time in history, value is no longer tied to material goods or even financial systems. It's tied to perception itself. The new coins are views, likes, shares, followers, signs that someone, somewhere, is watching. And in a world that equates visibility with worth, being unseen can feel like disappearing. We have become both the miners and the mined. Every second we spend online generates value for someone else. Our habits, our emotions, our preferences, all mapped, measured, and sold. The illusion is that the platforms are free, but the cost is invisible. Our attention, our time, our peace of mind. Each notification that pulls us in is a small withdrawal from the account of our focus. And the longer we stay, the richer the system becomes. What makes this illusion so powerful is that it doesn't feel forced. We participate willingly, even eagerly. The attention economy doesn't demand, it seduces. It offers the soft reward of recognition, a heart, a comment, a sense of belonging. Each small signal releases a spark of dopamine, a chemical whisper that says you matter. That whisper is addictive. It pulls us back, again and again, turning the search for connection into a cycle of craving. But what's strange about this new economy is that it doesn't just sell attention, it reshapes it. The more our minds are trained to seek validation through visibility, the harder it becomes to rest in solitude or silence. We start measuring our worth not by how we feel, but by how we appear. We curate ourselves the way brands curate products. Every photo, every post, every word becomes a performance, a bid for attention in a crowded marketplace of selves. This transformation isn't just cultural, it's psychological. The human mind was never built for this scale of visibility. In the past, our social circles were small. A few dozen faces, a handful of voices. Now each of us carries an audience in our pocket, an invisible crowd that never sleeps. Every thought we share can be seen, judged, rewarded, or ignored. And the silence that follows when no one reacts can feel like rejection, even when it isn't. This is how the illusion deepens. We begin to confuse being seen with being known, being noticed with being valued. The feedback loops of the attention economy amplify emotion but flatten meaning. Outrage travels faster than reflection. Noise drowns nuance. The result is a kind of emotional inflation, where feelings are exaggerated but depth is lost. And yet, for all its distortion, the attention economy taps into something profoundly human. To be seen is one of our oldest desires. Even a newborn, before it understands words, seeks a parent's gaze. Recognition is how we first learn we exist. The tragedy of the modern age is that this instinct has been captured and commercialized. What once belonged to the realm of love and relationship now belongs to algorithms and advertising. It's tempting to see this as purely a loss, the theft of our focus, the selling of our attention, but perhaps it's also a mirror. The systems we've built reflect not just our greed, but our longing. Beneath the noise, beneath the screens, we are still searching for connection, still hoping to feel seen not as data points, but as people. The attention economy, for all its distortions, is still powered by one timeless emotion, the wish to matter. Some resist this system by disconnecting, turning off devices, retreating into stillness, seeking peace in the analog world. And for a moment it works. The noise fades, the nervous rhythm slows, but even in silence the pull remains. Because the illusion of visibility has become entwined with identity, we no longer just want to live, we want to be witnessed living. This is the paradox of modern value. In earlier ages, we measured worth by what we produced. Now we measure it by what we project. The richest people are no longer just those with money, but those with reach. Influencers, icons, those who can turn attention into capital. The modern celebrity is not born from skill or craft alone, but from the ability to hold the gaze of the world. And every person, no matter how ordinary, now has access to the same stage. The lines between consumer and performer have vanished. We are all both audience and actor in the endless play of visibility. But attention, like any currency, can inflate and collapse. What was once rare and meaningful becomes common and fleeting. The more we chase it, the less it satisfies. To sustain the illusion, we need constant stimulation. New content, new emotions, new highs. The economy of attention is not built for peace, it's built for restlessness. And yet, amidst the noise, there are moments when something genuine breaks through. A story, a face, a voice that feels real. Those moments remind us that the illusion still carries traces of truth. Attention, when given freely and with care, can still be sacred. It can still connect us in ways that no algorithm can measure. The attention economy may be the latest form of the illusion of value, but it's also the most revealing. It shows us how easily belief can be redirected. From objects to numbers, from wealth to recognition, from gold to gaze. And in showing us that, it forces a question we can no longer ignore. What happens to value when everything becomes visible, but nothing feels seen? Perhaps the answer lies not in rejecting attention, but in reclaiming it, in learning to give it back to the things that truly matter. Because where our attention goes, our lives follow. It has always been that way. And maybe that's where the next part of this story begins. Not in the economy of illusion, but in the rediscovery of what cannot be priced at all. A slower kind of value, older than markets and newer than technology. A value measured not by numbers or eyes, but by meaning itself. Chapter 14: Unlearning the Illusion. There comes a point after centuries of believing, buying, and measuring, when something inside the human heart begins to tire. It is a quiet exhaustion, not the fatigue of effort, but of meaning. We have built empires out of faith in symbols. We have traded hours of our lives for numbers on screens. We have learned to measure our days in profit and progress. And yet, beneath all of it, there lingers an ache. A small voice that asks, what is any of this really worth? Unlearning the illusion doesn't happen all at once. It begins in small, personal moments. Moments when the story of value no longer fits. A person who has everything they ever wanted and still feels empty. A worker who spends decades chasing security only to realize that peace cannot be saved in an account. A society that grows richer by the year but lonelier by the day. These moments don't break the illusion immediately, they soften it. They create cracks where light can seep through. In those cracks, another kind of truth begins to show itself. A truth that whispers, maybe value was never meant to be held or counted or owned. Maybe it was meant to be experienced, to be shared, not stored, to be lived, not accumulated. Across the world, quiet movements have begun to grow. People and communities stepping outside the economy of endless exchange. They are not rejecting money itself, but the meanings attached to it. In some places they return to barter, trading skills, time, and kindness instead of currency. In others, they build local economies where cooperation replaces competition. Some turn to minimalism, not as aesthetic rebellion, but as a kind of spiritual economy, a way to remember what enough feels like. A man sells his house, buys a small cabin by the sea, and begins to live with less. He finds that with fewer possessions, time stretches longer. A woman quits a job she hates and starts teaching children to paint. Her income drops, but her laughter returns. A young family decides to grow their own food, to share meals with neighbors, to measure success not in savings but in moments of peace. These lives are not heroic. They are quiet revolutions, small acts of unlearning that ripple outward. To unlearn the illusion is to remember that value begins in the human experience, not in the systems we build to quantify it. When a mother stays awake comforting her child, when a friend listens without looking at their phone, when a stranger helps another cross the street. These are acts that cannot be monetized. They are invisible to economies, yet they hold the weight of what truly matters. We forget sometimes that value existed long before money. The first economies were made of care. Families survived because they shared. Communities thrived because they trusted. Even the earliest forms of trade were not about profit but about connection. To give was to belong. To share was to survive. Somewhere along the line we replaced that rhythm with one of accumulation. We turned giving into losing, sharing into scarcity, and connection into transaction. But human nature still remembers the older rhythm. It reveals itself in the moments we feel most alive, not when we gain, but when we give. The joy of helping, the peace of simplicity, the warmth of belonging. These are the original currencies of the heart. They remind us that value has never been a number. It has always been a feeling. Of course, we still live within the illusion. Bills must be paid, systems must run, the world still turns on exchange. To unlearn does not mean to escape, it means to see differently, to look at the same symbols and recognize them as stories rather than truths. Money can be a tool without being a master. Work can be meaningful without defining our worth. Wealth can be shared without being worshipped. This shift is more psychological than practical. It is a slow rewiring of perception. We begin by questioning the reflexes we inherited, the instinct to equate productivity with purpose, status with success, ownership with happiness. We begin by noticing how often our choices are guided by fear. Fear of not having enough, of not being enough. And in that noticing, a new freedom quietly begins to grow. That freedom does not come from abundance, but from detachment. When we stop tying our self-worth to wealth, we loosen the grip of the illusion. We begin to see money for what it is, a language, not a law, a story we tell to organize life, not a measure of life's value. This is what spiritual traditions have whispered for centuries in different tongues and symbols. The Buddha called it non-attachment. Jesus called it treasure in heaven. The Stoics called it virtue. All were pointing to the same truth, that the deepest wealth is not something that can be taken away. But unlearning is not easy. The illusion is seductive. It promises certainty in a world of chaos. It gives shape to our fears, purpose to our striving. Even when we see through it, we still reach for it. That's because belief, even in illusion, gives comfort. To step beyond it feels like stepping into emptiness. Yet if we linger there, in that empty space, we begin to feel something else. Stillness, presence, the quiet hum of life itself, asking for nothing. There is a story told in some small communities of people who live by what they call the gift. In these places, goods and services are shared freely without accounting. If you have, you give. If you need, you receive. There is no record, no ledger, no expectation of return. The system works not because it's efficient, but because it's human. It reminds everyone that trust is the real wealth, and gratitude is the only interest worth earning. In a way, this is the opposite of the illusion. The illusion says, hold, protect, accumulate. The gift says, release, share, connect. And yet, both are stories. The difference is that one isolates and the other unites. Unlearning the illusion doesn't mean erasing everything that came before. It means remembering that every system we've built, from gold to code, from markets to machines, began with the same human impulse, to connect, to trust, to create meaning together. When we forget that, the system owns us. When we remember it, the system becomes ours again. Perhaps the true task of our age is not to destroy money, but to see through it. To see that behind every symbol lies something sacred, a web of shared belief, a pulse of cooperation, a whisper of the human need to belong. The illusion isn't evil, it's simply incomplete. It points to something real, but stops short of the full truth. And that truth is this: value does not live in objects or systems or even ideas. It lives in moments. The moments when we choose care over control, presence over possession, faith over fear. When enough people begin to live this way, to unlearn the illusion not with anger but with awareness, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't collapse, it softens. The noise quiets. The frantic rhythm of earning gives way to the slower rhythm of being. And in that calm space, a new kind of value begins to appear, one that cannot be bought, sold, or measured, but only felt. A value that reminds us who we were before we believed in wealth, and who we might become once we remember what truly matters. Because when the illusion fades, what remains is not emptiness. It is connection. It is peace. It is the quiet truth that value was never out there to be found. It was always here, waiting to be remembered. Chapter 15: The Quiet Truth of Value. If you listen closely, beneath all the noise of transactions, markets, and ambition, there is stillness. It's faint, like a heartbeat under layers of machinery, but it's there. The quiet truth that value was never about what we owned or earned or measured. It was always about the simple act of believing together. Every coin ever minted, every bill ever printed, every digital balance glowing on a screen. All of it is made of the same invisible substance, trust. Without it, everything collapses. With it, even the smallest gesture can change the world. Trust is the first and last currency. Long before money existed, humans trusted each other enough to share. And long after the numbers fade, trust will remain. In the way a parent feeds a child, in the way strangers help each other through storms, in the way a community rebuilds after loss. The systems we've built, for all their complexity, are only reflections of this ancient instinct. Every economy, every trade, every promise made and kept. They are all versions of the same quiet miracle: cooperation. Somewhere along the way, we forgot this. We began to believe that value was external, something created, stored, protected, and owned. But the truth is gentler. Value is born every time we choose to trust, every time we believe that effort matters, that kindness matters, that our lives can mean something beyond survival. Money is simply a tool we made to carry that belief farther than our voices could reach. Perhaps the illusion of value was never a mistake. Perhaps it was an experiment in faith. Humanity needed a way to hold its trust across distance, to weave connection through trade, to turn belief into structure. The illusion gave us civilization. Cities, art, science, and the possibility of futures larger than ourselves. but now, after centuries of building, we are being invited to look again. To remember that the illusion was only ever the surface, and that what lies beneath it is more human, more fragile, and more real than we ever imagined. Imagine standing in a marketplace centuries ago. Around you, the air is thick with voices. Traders calling, coins clinking, people exchanging goods and promises. At first glance it looks like commerce, but look closer and you see something else. Each face, each gesture, each deal sealed with a nod or a handshake. It's not greed you're witnessing, but faith. Each transaction is an act of belief that the other will keep their word, that tomorrow will come, that the story of value still holds. We call it economy, but it is really a web of relationships. And every relationship, no matter how practical it looks, carries emotion beneath it. Hope, fear, trust, desire. These are the invisible forces that move money, markets, and lives. They are not separate from economics, they are its foundation. In the modern world, the illusion has grown intricate. We've built layers upon layers. Currencies, codes, contracts, algorithms, all designed to maintain trust at scale. And yet, for all our sophistication, we still live by the same ancient rhythm. When trust grows, economies flourish. When trust breaks, they collapse. Behind every boom and every bust lies a single human truth: belief is fragile. And maybe that's what gives it beauty. If money were eternal, if value were fixed, it would lose the warmth that makes it human. Its impermanence is a reminder of our own, that we live not in control but in connection. The fragility of belief is not a flaw, it's a feature. It keeps us humble. It forces us to cooperate. It makes us remember that what we call value is, in the end, a shared act of imagination. Look at the world around you. Every structure of wealth, every contract, every digital number flowing through servers and screens. They all depend on trust so deep we barely notice it. You trust that your salary will arrive, that the bank will honor your balance, that strangers you'll never meet will keep systems running so your life can move forward. It is astonishing, when you think about it, how much of modern existence hangs on invisible threads of mutual belief. And yet, even as we build these global webs of trust, we struggle to trust one another face to face. We trust data more than conversation, screens more than hands. The illusion of value has made us wealthier than ever before, but it has also made us lonelier. The connections that built the first markets, eye contact, honesty, empathy, have been replaced by transactions too fast to feel. The challenge now is not to destroy the illusion, but to humanize it again. That begins in small ways. It begins when someone forgives a debt out of compassion, not law, when a business chooses fairness over profit, when a person gives without expectation of return. These acts restore the soul of value, the understanding that worth is not measured by accumulation, but by connection. Perhaps the next evolution of money won't be technological, but emotional. Not a new system, but a new consciousness. One that sees wealth not as a possession, but as participation. One that measures prosperity not in profits, but in peace. There are already signs of this shift. Communities building cooperative models, movements reimagining work as care, young people valuing experience over ownership, meaning over luxury. These are not trends of rebellion, they are acts of remembering. A slow collective realization that life itself, the ability to love, to create, to share, is the only true wealth. When the illusion fades, what remains is clarity. the kind of clarity that arrives at the end of a long storm, when the sky opens and the air feels clean. You see that the world is not divided between the rich and the poor, the winners and the lost. It is divided only between those who believe in connection and those who forget it. Money, for all its faults, has always been a mirror. It reflects back to us what we value most. When we worship it, it reflects greed. When we use it wisely, it reflects care. When we share it, it reflects trust. The illusion of value, at its best, has always been a reflection of our capacity to create meaning together. So perhaps the task now is not to shatter the illusion, but to see through it, to live inside it consciously, with compassion and awareness, to remember that every number, every note, every coin is a story written in human belief, and that stories, when told with care, can heal. If we can see money not as an end but as a mirror, not as power but as participation, then the illusion transforms. It becomes a reminder of what binds us, not what divides us. It becomes proof that belief, when shared, is the most powerful force on earth. And maybe in the end, that is the quiet truth of value, that it has never been about what we own, but what we uphold, the invisible trust between strangers, the unseen generosity that flows through communities, the unspoken agreement that life, even in its simplest moments, is worth something beyond measure. When the noise fades and the numbers dissolve, that's what remains. Not wealth, not loss, just the soft, enduring pulse of belief, still beating, still connecting, still reminding us that value, like love, was never an illusion at all. It was the story that kept us human.